Hello friends, my name is Ryan, and I am here on behalf of talking about God. And more specifically in today's video, I'm here to talk about why it's more reasonable for you to believe that there is a God rather than that there isn't. And I'm using just mainly logical, ethical thinking and reasonings through these issues. I have four, right? It's got nothing to do with any world religion, right? Just simply in today's video, I've got four ethical, logical reasonings and pieces of evidence for why it's more reasonable to believe that there's a God than there's not. So before I even get into it, I just want to point out that I am by no means a teacher or a philosopher or a theologian, by any means. So if some of my explanations don't make a whole lot of sense, then I'm sorry. But if you have a question about anything, then please feel free to say it in the comments, and I'll respond and maybe go about it in a different approach. So on that note, I guess we'll just get right into it. And again, this has nothing to do with any of the world religions or anything of that matter. But I will point out one thing. I am a Christian, and as a Christian, you are essentially called, in a sense, because you're a disciple of Jesus, right? He's our Lord. And you are essentially called to go and spread the word, preach the gospel, and be loving and kind to everyone and anyone around you. So in that same sense, I am just here trying to be an advocate for the truth, because we unfortunately live in a world where the lies are really loud and the truth has been silenced. And so, again, the main reason for this channel even being created is because not only am I trying to speak as an advocate for the truth, I'm also just trying to get people to think, especially through the hard issues that a lot of people want to just, brush under the rug. Because, again, we are in a time, a very interesting time, where we have things like cell phones. That's what I'm using to record this. And we kind of abuse them because they're essentially a tool, but a lot of people in today's day and age use it for entertainment. So they'll, go like this for hours and hours looking at pointless media, fake news, doing all this stuff, doing all this swiping. So here's a logical reasoning for this. If you're spending your time looking at things that are important, then you'll never have the time to think about things that are important. That just makes sense, right? So, again, I'm not trying to bash on anyone or disrespect anyone, but in today's video, I just simply encourage you guys to think through these hard issues that I'm bringing up, because I have four. And this video will essentially be kind of tailored towards atheists, because atheists don't believe there's a God, and I am a firm believer of there being one. And if you're agnostic, what I'm kind of hoping is that if you stay till the end of the video and you hear through all my points, that you'll hopefully come out with a different perspective of you either making the choice, right, to believe or to not. Because that's what being agnostic is. You are on the fence. You don't know if there is a God or not. So I hope that by the end of this video you can make that decision. And if you're an atheist, I hope you can have an open mind and hear my points and also come to a logical, reasonable conclusion with those as well. But anyways, enough explaining, enough introduction. Let's just get into the nitty-gritty. I'm sure that's what everyone's hoping and here for. And yes, I have notes, so we're going to go off of this. But my first point, when you really think about it, it makes sense. But a lot of people don't think about this. But with the intricate order and design of everything and of people and of our planet, just, everything. With the intricate order and design of everything, it calls to that to have been done by an intelligent creator or an intelligent mind or a God. Because essentially what most atheists probably claim to conclude is that we all came about from the Big Bang, which essentially the Big Bang Theory states that it was a giant fireball explosion that just exploded and caused everything to be in existence. That to me, though, just simply doesn't make sense, because you cannot get design and order from a chaotic event. That just simply doesn't make sense. In the same sense that if you have metal and lithium and you slap it on a table, you don't get a phone. You got to have an intricate, orderly mind that goes in and takes these materials and does things to them and shapes them and molds them into the phone, right? So it's simply, to me, that's the first point. That's literally mainly the first point. Simply, it just does not make sense for the order and design of our entirety and of our universe to have came about by chance, by accident. It makes much more sense that it came about by a creator with an intelligent, orderly mind, who is a designer, right? That makes sense, logically. Now, this is a point that I kind of thought about pretty recently, actually. Something I am okay with is the fact that the Big Bang could have been used as like the creative process for how God brought everything into being. If there's enough evidence for that being a thing, then I'm fine with that being the creative process. But it alone being our origin of how everything came into being simply is illogical when you think about it. And that's what you got to acknowledge as an atheist, because you say there is no God. So we all came about by chance and by accident then in that scenario. So that's why the first point simply just states, if there's no God, then we came about by accident. And you cannot get order and design, which is what we see in our world and in everything around us, from an accident. That's so illogical, it's scary. So that's the first point. The second point, which is, it's pretty simple too. This is another simple point. What we tend to notice in life is that the human mother will birth the child, right? And the chicken will lay the egg, and the plants will provide oxygen for all life to flourish. So, as we can see with evidence of everything around us, life comes from life. So to me, someone who thinks like an atheist, it simply to me does not make sense to say that we all originated from the non-life, which is what you'd have to come to realize if you are an atheist. Because if there's no God, which is your worldview, then again, we came about by chance and by accident, right? So there was no life form, there was no being, there was no creator that created us. So that means we came about by chance. But again, with the evidence in our world of life coming from life, with everything, it simply just doesn't make sense that we have all originated from the non-life, because there needed to be some sort of driving factor, some sort of creative mechanism that brought us all into being. So that's the second point. With this third point that I have, it's a little difficult to understand. So again, that's why I encourage you, if you have any questions, please go freely into the comments and type something, because this is a pretty difficult point that I'm about to make, and it might not make a lot of sense to a lot of people. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But my third point for why it's more reasonable for there to be a God is because if there is none, then the whole idea that something is good and that something is evil is essentially an illusion, in the sense that there is no objective, no absolute moral, no absolute standard that states and gives this dividing line in the sand that says this is good and this is evil. It would simply be a personal preference. if there's no God. Because, again, the objective value, which you can only have something that's objective if it's like untouchable and if it's like given to you, right? So if there's a God that's given you these values and they're untouchable, then you have absolute objective rules and standards. But if you don't have that, then it's all relative. It's all subjective, and it's all personal preference. So, what you'd have to eventually come to understand is that someone down the street can say, you know, what Hitler did wasn't actually a bad thing, but then you can't get all upset because in your worldview, it's a personal preference. You have no objective morals that state this is right and this is wrong. You may think you do, which that's why you're contradicting your own worldview by doing that. You're essentially being, you're essentially living a life as if there is a God that gives you morals rather than actually subduing to your worldview. So that's why I'm trying, again, get people to think, and I'm encouraging you all, again, to think through the hard issues because this is truth. If there's no God, what you'd have to eventually come to acknowledge is that what you simply think is good and evil is subjective. So, that, folks, is essentially the third point. I'm going to give more details though, because a lot of people think like this. They think as an atheist that there's no God, but then you say things like, oh, that's super wrong to do something like this, and that's super good to do something like this. And in doing so, you aren't being consistent in your own worldview. You're contradicting yourself in what you claim to believe. So, and here's another point. There's some things that we just know in our heart that we don't even second guess. We know that these things are evil, right? Like 9/11 and the innocent abuse of a child. These are things that are absolutely evil. There's no second question about it. These are just bad things, right? Just in the same sense how if I was to give money to someone who is homeless or feed someone who's hungry, I don't think there's a single person who can come up to me and say, oh, that was a super bad thing that you just did. No, that doesn't even make sense logically. That was a really good deed, and it was something good that benefited them. So it was a good thing. So, we all, to a degree, acknowledge that there are absolutely good and absolutely evil things. And another reason too, that's why when we're a little kid playing in the sandbox and someone, I don't know, takes your toy, you get pretty upset about that. And you don't even need to know that through society or culture. That's just something that's God-given because you know it's wrong that they took your toy. You're upset. Even as a little youngster, it's something that is given to you innately, that ability to detect what is good and what is evil. So that is why, as an atheist, what you'd have to eventually come to acknowledge that you would need to live out your worldview and say, oh, everything's subjective, everything's relative, it's personal preference, right? Someone down the street can kill their kid, and it's no different from me feeding someone food. Like, it's a personal preference at the end of the day, if you're an atheist, what is good and what is evil. But we don't think like that. Nobody does. So, you got to come part with reality and come to this conclusion and hopefully eventually realize that you're either being inconsistent in your own worldview or you got to realize that what you think is evil and good is subjective. If you are an atheist, right? Again, I am a confident believer in faith, and I believe that there is a God, which I believe is Jesus Christ. We're not even going to get into that. But we all know, to a certain degree, like the golden rule, right? Do unto others as they would do to you. These are things that we all know, but that is something that's God-given, okay? And you can't put your foot down and say this is good and this is wrong. If you're an atheist, it's simply personal preference. That's what I'm trying to get at, okay? So I hope that point made sense. I had to go really into detail on it because there's really just a lot to kind of wrap your head around with that point alone. Essentially, what I'm trying to get at is that if there is no God, then this idea that something is absolutely good or something that is absolutely evil is essentially an illusion. It's personal preference. So that's my third point. I hope that made sense. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments. I will get to them. But anyways, let's get to the fourth and final point, which is essentially the icing on top of the cake. It's the cherry on top. It's the point that I really hope gets your gears turning to either make you see this from a different perspective and a different lens, but not only that, just to get you to think, which is what this whole video is trying to encourage people to do. With this point, please just listen to it, and it may sound harsh, but in that harshness is a lot of truth to the worldview. But, my friends, if there's no God, life is meaningless. It is. It really is. Because if there's no God that's given us God-given morals and standards and rules and value, innate value that is untouchable, right? And if we were all brought about, again, by accident, which goes back to my other points, if we were all brought about by accident and by chance, then what we do in this life simply just doesn't really matter. You can do whatever you want. Now, obviously, practically, you can't do whatever you want, because if you were to go rob a bank, then you would get sent to jail or in prison, whatever. But ethically speaking, from a philosophical standpoint, right? If there is no God that gives us value, morals, or a purpose that is untouchable above the value that we give ourselves, then that means the value that we think we have is simply an illusion. Because again, I should probably make this point clear too. We can't hold ourselves as being reliable, especially with our own understanding of things, because we at times have done good and evil. Because we're not reliable enough. The only person that essentially was Jesus Christ. Okay, he was the perfect person, right? That's why I believe in him. He was the perfect person. He had amazing ethical teachings, and he was super wise and just amazing. But not only that, he was sacrificed in the most gruesome, most grotesque way for us, for our sins, because if he didn't do that, we would essentially have no shot at heaven with him. But since he did that, we now have a shot at being in heaven with him, our Creator. Right? Again, I'm not trying to bring in religion, but that's just why I simply believe in Jesus Christ. So, I know I kind of went off topic, I'm sorry, but it isn't real. It would be an illusion. The value that we give ourselves and in people and in money and materialistic things. It's not really valuable at the end of the day, because those things aren't going to last. They're never going to last. Okay? And again, if we were all created by accident and by chance, again, I'm probably repeating myself, I know, I'm sorry, but if we all came about by accident and by chance, then we simply, nothing really matters. It really doesn't. Now, obviously, we can give ourselves and other things value, yes, but there's no absolute value. Meaning that, once again, it is all relative and just a personal preference. No God essentially means no meaning in life. So, again, what you'd have to eventually acknowledge, especially as an atheist, if your birth is an accident, and if your death is an accident, guess what lies between those two accidents? Another accident, which would be your life. And that's just simple logic. That's, again, this whole thing is logically ethical standpoints. And I hope this makes sense. Because, again, I'm no teacher by any means. So, just trying to throw that out there. But here's one thing I will point out. This atheist philosopher, his name's Albert Camus, and if you watch Cliffe Knetchle, if you even know who that is, he's a Christian debater, theologian who goes around college campuses and talks about Jesus. But he brings up this guy a lot to an atheist, and because this atheist philosopher was able to be super honest with his worldview. He was consistent and he was, being honest, right? Which, again, there's not a whole lot of that going on nowadays. So I have high respects for this guy who was able to say what I'm about to eventually say. But he was able to acknowledge, and I quote, that the literal meaning of life is whatever you're doing that prevents you from killing yourself. Now, again, I told you this was going to be probably a harsh point, but again, in this harshness is a lot of truth. Because what this atheist philosopher was able to acknowledge was that the only meaning, really, in your life, since there's no God that gives you meaning, is what you put value in things and what you are doing that prevents you from, But since I have reason to believe that there is an innate God that gives us God-given value, meaning, and purpose in life, then it's got to lead to us having higher value than what we give ourselves and other things value. Because we all have a drive for it, right? Again, like what I said in the beginning, we all have a drive to find what our truth is in whatever and wherever it is. It's the same that goes with this, especially with the meaning of your life. Everyone has a drive to find what their meaning in life is. But the thing at the end of the day is that if there's no God, you essentially don't have any innate, meaning intouchable value that was given to us. I hope that makes sense. So again, that's got to lead us to have higher value in the things that we give to our lives, other people, money, and materialistic things that won't last. So that's essentially the fourth point. I probably butchered that explanation, but I'm sorry. That's the best way I could explain it. And so what I now encourage you, if you've made it this far, I applaud you, especially as an atheist, because I know it's probably hard to hear another person's perspective on life. But, and if you're agnostic, I hope you've hopefully by now made your decision to either not believe or believe. Because we all owe it to ourselves to be true and honest in what we think. And so that's why with what you now know, I encourage you to go and look through the evidence. Look at all of the world religions. Because if you've made it this far, now you've come to the realization as an atheist that you either, you can't live out your moral relativism. And if you're agnostic, you'll eventually realize that you can't stay on the fence forever because you're eventually going to have to choose either to believe or not. That is when you will eventually come to the world religions to give you the evidence for who and what our God is and his character and his teachings and all of that. Now, I just want to make this one point very clear. Do not, and please, I repeat, do not believe in Jesus Christ because I do, because I said he's more reliable. You, as your own thinking individual with your own thinking rational mind, you need to go out and look at all the evidence for yourself because you owe it to yourself as a thinking individual, and plus it's more genuine in what you will eventually conclude. But you need to go out and look at all the world religions, find the evidence for all of them, and then eventually do a cross-off method and be like, hey, does this one make sense? If it doesn't, cross it off. Go on to the next one. If that one doesn't make sense, do that until you eventually find what makes sense for you, right? That is essentially what this video, again, tailored. It's tailored towards the atheists, but it's really meant for everyone, because I want this channel to be a door that is open to anyone to come and hear what I got to say and hopefully come out with a new perspective. But one thing you will have to come to learn, which is what I had to learn, is that you can't take the easy way out and believe in all of them, because they all contradict one another. They all do. So you can't have one thing that says this thing and then another thing that says another thing both be the same. So for instance, Jesus, claimed to be Messiah, right? But Muhammad also claimed to be Messiah. And he said that Jesus was a good teacher and a good prophet, but he was not the Messiah. So right there, that's a contradiction. You can't believe in both of them. So with that in mind, you essentially, again, you just got to go in and do process of elimination and do what makes sense to you. So again, I am a Christian, and my beliefs and faith is towards Christianity. So this whole channel will be tailored towards that. And I'll probably be making more videos about Jesus in the future. But again, this video in particular, which is also my first one that will be on the channel, is just strictly why it's more probable and more reasonable that there is a God rather than that there isn't. And I guess to conclude, there is this one quote that I want to say from this one philosopher. His name, I believe, was Blaise Pascal. I don't know if he was a Christian or if he was atheist or not. But this quote is kind of what almost forced me, in a sense, to do the research once I heard it. Because again, we owe it to ourselves as thinking individuals to look through the hard issues and find a conclusion. But this quote right here, which I hope also encourages you guys to think as well and go through and look at the evidence and research for yourself. But I'll just quote him, okay, and we'll just end it off here. But he said, and I quote, "I would rather live my life as if there is a God and then die to find out there isn't, rather than to live my life as if there isn't a God and then to die to find out there is." Yeah. Just in that sentence alone, that's kind of groundbreaking in a sense. So I just, again, encourage you guys to think. And when I say that, I'm not trying to say people are stupid. It's just some people are kind of blinded because they're either not thinking through these important issues or they got other things going on. I get it. It's life, right? But just, especially if you've made it this far in this video, just please think through the issues I've pointed out, and hopefully you can come out with a new perspective on God, and hopefully have a new, better perspective on life as well. But I guess on that note, guys, we're going to end it off here. So God bless, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.